Also, with respect, one of the things that I noticed as well was that there was new regulations as it related to reducing red tape. So this is an example, I think, of a piece of legislation that passed the government and was actually proclaimed. So it's in effect. However, the current government, and especially during the election campaign, made it clear that they wanted Ontario to be open for business. And one of the ways to do that is to reduce the regulatory burden.
Yeah, so when Bill 148, which was the bill we spoke about previously that made all the changes to the Employment Standards Act, raised the minimum wage, Labor Relations Act, came into effect, around the same time the Wynne government introduced the Reducing the Regulatory Burden Act, reducing red tape, which committed the government to reducing by $1.25 the regulatory burden for every dollar of new regulation that they introduced. And this is actually in effect, and it's the law of Ontario at this point. Interestingly, as you noted, obviously the new government has indicated they're wanting to make sure Ontario is open for business, and that's clear to everyone. In fact, even with the naming of the deputy ministers, there is now, in fact, a deputy minister who's responsible strictly for the reduction of the regulatory burden, which also happened to be formerly the Deputy Minister of Economic Development, which is where this piece of legislation resides. So would be quite familiar with this.
Right.
So, philosophically, this would seem to be a piece of legislation that probably wouldn't be touched because although it was introduced by a Liberal government, it is philosophically in line with where the PC government wants to go. However, the PC government may have a different way that they want to go about reducing the regulatory burden, and certainly how it ended up being rolled out by the Wynne government, where it was the government usually proposed both how much it was going to cost in terms of new regulatory burden, as well as how they were going to offset that increased cost, as opposed to letting stakeholders point out, not individual companies, but on an industry-wide basis, here's where there's regulatory burdens on our industry, and here's how you could reduce the regulatory burden. So I would suspect, at least from a policy shift on this, that you're going to see an opportunity for there to be the offsets on new regulatory burdens that that stakeholders are actually going to have an opportunity to weigh into that, propose what those might be. And that really is where, why this might be of importance to people who are watching, is that ultimately, if you operate in Ontario, you're regulated in some way. And there's going to be some level of regulatory burden that you're going to be facing. This piece of legislation, either it gives you an opportunity to go into government, to the new government, to let them know where you're experiencing pain and how they might be able to ease that regulatory burden. But it also might lead to a new policy change in terms of how they're actually implementing this piece of legislation so that open consultation does take place.
Yeah, it almost seems like there's an opportunity that this government might feel that legislation simply didn't go far enough. Mm-hmm. Whether it translates into, instead of $1.25, $1.25 for every dollar in new regulations, maybe it might be $1.50 or $1.75. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, there's the potential for it to be reopened to make it go further.